We were floating on 80 feet of plywood and gasoline, outnumbered 300 to 1 by elite Japanese soldiers. One spark would turn our boat into a funeral pyre, but we weren't there to hide, we were there to hunt steel giants. The lethal beam of the Japanese destroyer's searchlight sliced through the obsidian darkness, sweeping across the water like the accusing finger of death itself. As the light grazed our bow by mere inches, we suspended our breathing, our engines idling in a hush, drifting silently in the gloom off Vella La Vella while 23 American sailors pressed themselves flat against the deck of PT-164, willing themselves to vanish into the shadows. Unseen in the black waters of the Solomon Sea behind that destroyer, nearly 8,000 enemy soldiers aboard 3 transports sat oblivious to the fact that their journey to reinforce Columbangra was destined to end in tragedy. It was July 19, 1943, and the clock was ticking down. In exactly 4 minutes, we were poised to unleash absolute hell from our concealment. My knuckles turned white as I crushed the grips of the twin .50 caliber mount, while beside me, Ensign Robert, Dutch, Vanderberg whispered targeting coordinates to our skipper, Lieutenant Commander Arthur M. McPherson. The only illumination we dared to risk was the ghostly green phosphorescent glow of the compass face. Lurking behind us, cloaked in the lunar shadow cast by the volcanic peaks of Vella La Vella, PT-168 and PT-171 awaited our command. We were the phantom daggers of America, and the Japanese Navy was moments away from learning why the darkness was no longer their sanctuary. My name is Chief Petty Officer Tom Harrigon, United States Navy Reserve, and I was among the first to demonstrate that small boats crafted from wood could dismantle warships forged of steel. I am often asked what it felt like to be a component of the most closely guarded naval secret of 1943. But the honest truth is that we were too occupied with survival to contemplate our place in history. All we knew with certainty was that if we failed this night, those 8,000 enemy troops would land on Columbangra to slaughter American boys fighting for that strategic airfield. Every torpedo in our tubes symbolized hundreds of American lives preserved. Every transport sent to the seabed meant parents back home would be spared that devastating telegram from the War Department. To truly grasp how 3 vessels smaller than the average private yacht could challenge the Imperial Japanese Navy at its zenith, you must first understand the adversary we faced in the summer of 1943. The Japanese had refined night combat into an art form, following their triumph at Sevo Island the previous August, where they sank 4 Allied cruisers without a single loss. They claimed ownership of the dark in the Solomon Islands. Their sailors were drilled for years in nocturnal warfare, fighting without radar, relying instead on supernatural eyesight and synchronized coordination. They christened their supply runs the Tokyo Express, while we dubbed them the Rat Run. But regardless of the name, they moved men and material with near impunity once the sun vanished. While the American Navy possessed larger ships, superior radar, and heavier firepower, we were losing the war for the night because our admirals, schooled in the rigid battle line tactics of Jutland and Manila Bay, could not pivot fast enough to this guerrilla warfare at sea. Our cruisers and destroyers, built for open ocean duels, were defenseless targets in the narrow, reef-choked waters of the Solomons. We required a new solution, something the Japanese imagination could not predict. That solution was being constructed in clandestine boatyards from New Orleans to New York, destined to revolutionize naval warfare. The patrol torpedo boat, the PT boat, was the offspring of desperation and American ingenuity. Measuring 80 feet long and 20 feet wide, they were built not of steel, but of laminated mahogany plywood. 3 Packard V-12 engines, modified descendants of Liberty aircraft engines, propelled them to speeds exceeding 45 knots, outpacing any torpedo or conventional warship afloat. We were armed with 4 21-inch torpedo tubes housing Mark 13 torpedoes, a 20mm Oerlikon cannon, 4.50 caliber machine guns, and just enough ammunition to create chaos for 15 minutes of sustained fury. After that quarter hour, we either headed for home or for the bottom of the sea. I first laid eyes on a PT boat in February 1943 at the training center in Melville, Rhode Island, having come from destroyer duty in the North Atlantic when the Navy sought volunteers for hazardous duty on experimental craft. The recruiters withheld the nature of the vessels, revealing only that the casualty rate was projected to exceed 50%. Out of 200 volunteers, only 40 were chosen. I made the cut thanks to my ability to navigate by the stars and my background handling small boats on the Chesapeake Bay. When I first stepped onto the deck of PT-164, I questioned the Navy's sanity, for this was no warship, but rather a glorified speedboat with grand illusions. The hull was wood in a war dominated by steel and armor plate. Living quarters were so compressed that hot bunking was mandatory, and armor protection was non-existent save for some sheet metal around the bridge. A single hit from anything larger than a rifle would turn us into matchsticks drifting on the tide. But then I met McPherson, and the picture shifted. Mac was 28, an ancient man by PT standards, with eyes that had witnessed too much carnage. He had survived the attack on the USS Shaw at Pearl Harbor, fought at Midway, and volunteered for the boats because, as he put it, he was tired of being a target and wanted to become the hunter. Mac grasped a truth it took us weeks to internalize. PT boats were not meant to fight like ships of the line, but as maritime guerrillas, assassins of the sea who struck from ambush and vanished before a reaction could be mounted. Our crew was a tapestry of misfits and savants who would never have served together on a standard vessel. Dutch Vanderberg, our XO, was a Yale mathematics professor capable of calculating torpedo trajectories in his head faster than a slide rule. Chief motor machinists made Carlos, Charlie, Mendoza had built racing engines in Los Angeles pre-war, and could tune our temperamental packets to purr or roar on command. Radioman Second Class William, Sparks, Patterson came from the silent world of submarines, while our torpedo man, gunner's mate First Class Patrick, Paddy, O'Brien, was an artist with his mechanical fish. Each Mark 13 weighed 2,200 pounds and cost the price of a house, and Paddy tended to them with more tenderness than most men showed their wives, constantly polishing and adjusting them, insisting these beauties were the only reason the enemy would take us seriously. The remainder of our 12-man crew included 2 gunners, an engineer, a cook medic, and 3 seamen, a mix of black and white, city and farm, dropouts and graduates, all volunteers united by the knowledge that survival was statistically unlikely. Training at Melville was brutal, as the Navy, stung by early losses, knew enthusiasm was insufficient. We needed to be faster and more vicious than the Japanese. We drilled high-speed attacks until we could fire accurately while slamming over waves at 40 knots, learned to navigate by sound and gut instinct in blinding squalls, and most crucially, learned to think like pirates. Commander James, Wild Jim, Patterson, a survivor of the Philippines campaign, taught us to discard fairness and tradition, to make the enemy fear the dark instead of fearing it ourselves, emphasizing that surprise and audacity were our true weapons. We arrived at our forward base at Rendova on June 30, 1943, amidst the invasion of New Georgia, finding a base that was merely a fuel dump and camouflaged huts hidden in the rot and diesel stench of the tropics, accompanied by the ceaseless thunder of artillery from Munda Airfield. Our unit, Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 9, was tasked with the complex mission of interdicting Japanese reinforcements in a maze of reefs and volcanic islands patrolled by enemy seaplanes and destroyers. Our first patrol on July 5 was a catastrophe. Spotted by a floatplane near Vela Gulf, we were chased by 4 destroyers, and PT-158 was vaporized by a direct 5-inch shell hit, taking 12 men with it. We spent hours dodging death, firing nothing, and learning the hard lesson Mac articulated that night. We could not fight gun duels, only ambush. Over the next fortnight we evolved, learning to mask our approach with radar shadows, running on single engines to reduce noise, and coordinating multi-boat attacks with silent light signals. We relied on a remarkable intelligence network of Australian coast watchers and native Solomon Islanders who risked execution to paddle canoes out with data on Japanese movements. While we sometimes received decrypted schedules, we mostly hunted on instinct. In July 1943, we were still secret weapons, referred to only as small craft, in communiques, leaving the Japanese to report us as submarines or mines, unable to conceive of wooden boats attacking steel ships. That ignorance was our ace. On July 18, Intel reported a major reinforcement run through Blackett Strait toward Vila on Kolombangara, large transports with light escort in narrow waters. Mac volunteered us to lead the attack alongside PT-168 under Lieutenant Henry, Hank, Bramwell and PT-171 under Lieutenant J.G. Joseph, Joey, Antonelli. The briefing was tense, detailing elite troops from the 13th Regiment who had to be stopped at all costs, even if it meant ramming. As the sun bled into the sea on July 19th, we prepped, setting torpedoes for shallow depth and loading armor-piercing incendiary rounds to shred bridge windows and ignite fires. At 20-30 hours, we slipped into the dark, muffling our engines, testing our guns briefly before settling into the rhythmic hiss of the hull cutting through the chop. The rough seas promised to mask our wake and noise, a vital advantage. By 2300, we drifted at our ambush point, waiting until 2347 when Sparks intercepted a report of 3 large ships and 2 escorts 15 miles out. Mac engaged engines, moving us to intercept the convoy at the strait's choke point. At 0018 hours on July 20th, Dutch spotted the dark silhouettes against the stars. The Japanese were in perfect formation, unaware that Mac had devised a dangerously simple plan to thread the needle between them, sending PT-168 to port, PT-171 to starboard, and us straight up the middle. We crept in at 5 knots, letting the convoy close the distance until we could hear the thrum of their massive diesels and see the pagoda bridges. At 1,000 yards, Mac signaled, and 3 PT boats erupted from idle to full roar, bows lifting as we surged to 40 knots, shattering the night. The Japanese were stunned, their lookouts failing to process attackers moving at such velocity. We pierced their formation, my twin .50s raking the nearest destroyer's bridge as Paddy launched 2 torpedoes at point-blank range, 600 yards. The mechanical fish hit the water, and seconds later, the first transport, a converted liner, was struck. The explosion was a thunderclap of light, breaking the ship's back and dumping hundreds of soldiers into the sea. PT-168 struck the second transport, an ammo ship that detonated with volcanic force, the shockwave knocking me down and showering us with burning debris. The destroyers, unable to depress guns low enough to hit us without hitting their own ships, tried to ram. The nearest one turned its knife-edge bow toward us, but Mac threw the wheel over and gunned the throttles, pivoting the boat so sharply we missed death by 10 feet as I poured tracers into their bridge. PT-171 was less fortunate, caught by searchlights and stitched by 25mm cannon fire that damaged her bow and hit a torpedo that miraculously failed to detonate, forcing Joey to abort. With the element of surprise gone and the water churning with shell splashes from waking Japanese guns, Mac ordered us to empty the tubes and flee. Paddy fired our last 2 fish at the third transport, but the captain combed the tracks, and we turned to run, weaving through a storm of steel. Behind us, the second transport's death throes lit the strait. 2 ships were down, taking 6,000 soldiers with them, while the survivors retreated to rebel. We regrouped 5 miles south, patching PT-171's holes with mattresses and counting our blessings. PT-168 was battered, and we had scorch marks, but we were alive. The return trip was a tense game of hide-and-seek with floatplanes, hiding under palm fronds, but the debriefing confirmed we had changed the game. Japanese radio intercepts spoke of Mosquito boat terror, revealing they were now afraid of the dark, forcing them to alter supply strategies and starve their garrisons. The psychological victory was immense, as the myth of their nocturnal invincibility shattered. Success had a cost. Within weeks, we lost PT-166 to a mine, PT-162 to daylight destroyer fire, and Joey Antonelli to a sniper. By October, when I rotated home, we had lost 7 boats and 73 men, but we had sunk or damaged 40 vessels. I returned in 1944 to better boats with radar, but the spirit remained: speed, surprise, audacity. The Japanese never adapted, overwhelmed by the devil boats that struck like cobras. Mac survived to command destroyers. Dutch became an oceanographer mapping currents. Charlie built racing engines, and Paddy wrote the torpedo manual, always proud of his fish. We proved that technology and courage could trump tradition, establishing a legacy seen in every modern fast attack craft. We were the Mosquito Fleet that brought down an empire, striking from the shadows until the rising sun finally set.